Iran went to great pains today to send a message to the world that its nuclear programming is becoming more self-sufficient and that it's advancing. The first Iranian-made fuel rods were loaded into a reactor in Tehran while President Ahmadinejad looked on. Iran also says it's activated a new, more advanced set of centrifuges. But what does it all mean? Ali Hanonan appeared on the iDesk earlier. He's a former deputy director for the International Atomic Energy Agency. Listen to what he had to say.
In a laboratory scale, they have been able to demonstrate that they can manufacture fuel for this Tehran research reactor. But that's not the most important point. I think that there were a couple of other announcements at the same time, which I think serve a little bit more attention. And one is this Fordo enrichment plant, which according to the Iranian authorities has now achieved a stage of routine operation. And this is actually a very firm message to the international community by saying that Iran continues to defy the requirements. If you look commercial production, the facility should be much bigger. It should have much more centrifuges available than what it can absorb today. So I think it's mainly for small-scale demonstration or eventually to produce high-enriched uranium.
All right, mainly for small-scale demonstrations. Still, this is getting the attention of the world, and it was broadcast on state television in Iran, so clearly designed for an international, but also potentially for a domestic audience. Karim Sadjadpour is an associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and he joins me now live from Washington. So, Karim, who was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad they're targeting with this display on state television in Iran?
Hala, there was a famous U.S. President, Teddy Roosevelt, who famously advocated to speak softly but carry a big stick. And I think Iran has a tendency to speak loudly and carry a small stick, meaning this announcement was in many ways quite exaggerated. But what the Iranian government needs to show to its population is that the Iranian people have suffered enormous cost as a result of the government's nuclear intransigence. And they have to be able to show people that there has also been some forward progress, some benefits to this nuclear program.
Well, I want to show our viewers some of the images that were aired on state television. And there we have nuclear scientists wearing face masks. But also on the wall, interestingly, Karim, are pictures of the murdered nuclear scientists that Iran says Israel killed. Talk to us about the symbolism of all of this in a nuclear laboratory.
Well, I think certainly what the Iranian government would like to do is drum up nationalist support, popular support for their nuclear ambitions. But I would argue, Hala, that the popularity of this nuclear program within Iran has been very much exaggerated, meaning I think that when people wake up in the morning in Tehran and other Iranian cities, they're not thinking about nuclear fuel rods and centrifuges and enriched uranium. They're thinking about day-to-day concerns, about finding jobs, about putting food on the table, about paying the rent. And I don't think that the Iranian public, A, is very well informed about what their government is doing, and B, I don't see that the population is going to support the government indefinitely through this tremendous economic duress which people are experiencing.
But Karim, I was going to say, regardless of scientifically where Iran stands in its nuclear program in the neighborhood, as you know, not just Israel, Saudi Arabia, I mean, these are countries that consider Iran with a nuclear weapon even 2 years down the line to be an existential threat. So what happens next, then, as it continues to display these achievements on television?
I think, Hala, that what you're going to continue to see on the U.S. end is a policy of coercive diplomacy, of using economic pressures, political pressures, to try to change Iran's cost-benefit calculations and compel the Iranian regime to make meaningful and binding nuclear compromises. I just don't see that as a high likelihood in 2012. So I think we're going to continue to see a stalemate in the coming months. But soon, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, I think, will have to make some very difficult decisions, whether to make a nuclear compromise with the West or to go for a nuclear weapon. And he's been in power, Hala, for 23 years. He's not a gambler. He's someone who's been pretty shrewd. But I think both decisions for him would be pretty big gambles.
Right. Well, I mean, knowing him, knowing his style of leadership, here's a man who potentially then would choose what option, do you think? To go ahead with a nuclear weapon or to say it's not worth the isolation?
You know, on one hand, he's long been averse to compromise because he believes that succumbing to pressure will only encourage more pressure. On the other hand, what he has to calculate is if he decides to go for the weapons option, if they're a few years away, he's got to feel secure that the regime will be able to withstand the current and escalating levels of economic and political pressure for that time period. And so I certainly don't envy him. I think that he's put himself in a very difficult position. And in some ways, I would argue that time is more on the side of the United States than it is Iran, because the more time which Iran is subject to this pressure, the more domestic discontent there's going to be.
And the more the economy, I mean, the economy is not doing well either on some levels. So thank you very much, Karim Sadjadpour.
Thank you.
As always, for joining us on CNN International. Jerusalem Bureau Chief Kevin Flower joins me now from there with more reaction. What have people said inside of Israel about this display today on television?
Well, Hala, on an official level, there's been no comment from the Israeli government, which is not that uncommon. They usually prefer to let the U.S. and the EU do the talking, preferring to frame this as an international problem, not an Israel problem. But one Israeli official did tell me that to believe that this display today and that Iran's nuclear program was for civilian purposes was tantamount to believing in the Easter Bunny. This source further said also to assume the program is benign is to ignore all the facts. So these are not necessarily new messages that we're hearing from Israel, Hala, but they come amidst this week of increased sort of back and forth between the Israeli government and Iran. Today, the Israeli prime minister spoke in the Knesset. He reasserted a claim that Iran is the chief exporter of terror in the world. He laid responsibility on the Iranian regime for these bombings that took place in Bangkok, and New Delhi, and Tbilisi. This is what he had to say earlier today, Hala.
Iran is a threat to the stability of the world. They are targeting innocent diplomats. The international community has to denounce the Iranian actions and to indicate red lines concerning the Iranian aggression. This kind of aggression, if it isn't stopped, will spread to many other countries.
No, Iran, for its part, has denied the accusations from Israel. It's actually turned the tables on Israel, saying that they believe the Israeli Mossad may have been responsible for these bombs in an effort to tarnish the image of Iran. But in the end, Hala, what this is really about and what analysts here are saying, this is an intensification of the shadow war going on between these two countries. And Iran specifically trying to strike back at Israel for what it believes is Israel's role in the assassination of those 4 nuclear scientists that you mentioned earlier, Hala.
Thanks, Kevin Flower. Thank you. The recent bombings in Georgia, India, and Thailand have only increased tensions. We were discussing them there with Kevin. Sarah Seidner reports on the investigation into whether those 3 bombings are linked.
A gruesome scene on the streets of Bangkok. A suspected bomber lies in agony after police say he accidentally blew off his own legs. In total, 3 explosions went off in Bangkok Tuesday, one of them inside a rental home. Police say the suspected bomber had fled. Neighbors were terrified. I was sweeping my house and suddenly a big blast happened. I went deaf. I was very scared, she says. Thai authorities say Iranian nationals were responsible for the blast. Closed-circuit television video has captured images of 3 of the suspects. 3 suspects have now been arrested, one who fled to Malaysia. Another suspect is still at large. The blasts come within 24 hours of 2 car bombings, one in Tbilisi, Georgia, and the other in New Delhi, India. In those countries, authorities say Israelis were the intended targets.
It's quite clear that a very well-trained person has committed this attack. There's also reason to believe that the target was the Israeli diplomat's wife, and therefore one has to proceed on the basis that it was a terrorist attack.
In the New Delhi car bombings, police say a motorcyclist drove up to the back of the Israeli embassy van and attached an explosive device when the van stopped at a red light, a method not seen before in this country. 4 people were injured, including a diplomat's wife. On the same day, a device was found on an Israeli embassy car in Tbilisi, but it was safely detonated. Delhi and Tbilisi police have not determined who is behind the attack. Thai police say there may be a connection between the Bangkok and India bombings.
From our intelligence, we believe that the bombs are of the same type used in India.
Israel says Iran is behind the attacks.
Unfortunately, Iran is running terror against Israel for many, many years. It's a few decades now. They are trying to target Israeli sites and Jewish sites. And what they've done recently is something that we are fully aware of their involvement.
Iran rejects Israel's claim, saying it had nothing to do with the blast. Now, this comes at a time when tensions are rising over Iran's nuclear program, and it also follows the alleged car bombing killings of several of Iran's nuclear scientists. And even as these investigations continue in New Delhi, Bangkok, and Tbilisi, there is concern now as to what might happen next. Sarah Seidner, CNN, New Delhi.
You're at the International Desk.